Hey guys and welcome, my name is Cedric Foley aka Seti Pours, and today we're going to be talking about cocktail bitters, why they're important, how to use them, and why not to be afraid of them. And we're going to get into it right away.
Top Shelf Distillers.
Now, what are cocktail bitters? Bitters are concentrated flavor extracts that highlight certain flavors in a cocktail, or they can add additional flavors as well. They're essentially the backbone that gives dimension and complexity to your cocktail. So essentially, you're looking at a little bottle of liquid of concentrated flavor that essentially acts like the baking spices of the cocktail world. Think about when a cook uses salt and pepper and some herbs to make a delicious meal. It's the same idea, but in liquid form for making cocktails. Now let's talk a little bit about how to taste your bitters. It's very important when you come across bitters to give it a taste to decipher all the flavor notes, all the different layers of flavor that you've got in here. Now, for example, here I've got an orange bitters, but I'm wondering what else do I taste in here? Obviously there's gonna be orange, but there might be a little something else. So give yourself a little dab on the side of your hand, give it a smell. It smells very fresh, orangey, so that's nice because it's orange bitters, it makes sense. Give it a slurp, give it a taste. What do you taste? Right off the bat, I'm getting some spice. I'm getting some ginger. Orange and ginger goes very, very well together. I'm also getting some bitterness. Now, where's that bitterness coming from? From the roots that we use to add as a bittering agent in this bitters. Now, by itself, it's very stringent, very bitter, but once you dilute that in a cocktail, that bitterness is essentially gonna fade away and it's gonna become more palatable. Now that you got that concentrated flavor and aroma, you got a general idea of how it's gonna taste, but you're not quite sure how it's gonna taste when it's diluted. This is where soda water comes in. If you don't have soda water, you can just use regular water. Tap water is fine. I'd like to put that on ice with just a little bit of soda water. That's about the volume of a cocktail that I would typically make using bitters. So what I'm gonna do is add about 3 dashes of the bitters inside my soda water here. I'm gonna give that a little smell. The aromatics are there. The effervescence and the carbonation while the bubbles are popping actually shoots that aroma right up towards me, which is fantastic. Nice and juicy orange aromas. Give that a little taste. And yeah, so just a little bit of ginger, not as strong as it was when I was trying it in its pure concentrated form. It's a lot more floral, orangey, and fruity. And it's definitely not bitter anymore because it's diluted in there. So the bitterness essentially is gonna fight off certain volatile flavors that you had in a cocktail or some strongness in certain spirits. But overall, these are the 2 techniques that I recommend for trying out your bitters. Give it a dab on your hand, test it out in its concentrated form, and then try it in a bit of soda water to try it in its diluted form. Now, bitters became increasingly important in cocktail making up until Prohibition. Unfortunately, due to liquor laws, a lot of these bitter making businesses had to go out of business. So a lot of them were lost, but happily for us, there've been a renaissance in the cocktail world since the early 2000s. So you can see many, many different styles of bitters available to you today in a whole array of flavors. All right, now since we are talking about cocktail bitters, let's talk a little bit about the word cocktail. Now, the word cocktail was first published in an American publication in 1806, and the recipe called for any spirit of your choice, some water, some sugar, and some bitters. And from that moment forward, that became the template for making cocktails up until today. Now, you might be asking yourself, how do we make bitters? Bitters are made by extracting botanicals using some type of solvent. Here at Top Shelf, we strictly use alcohol as a solvent. Also, the higher the concentration of alcohol in your solvent, so if you got a 40% bottle versus an 80% alcohol bottle, the 80% will have a higher maceration or extraction force. Now, the botanicals used to make bitters depends on the style and flavor bitters that you want to make. For example, if you want to make an aromatic bitter, you're going to be using some strong bacon spices, such as cardamom, allspice, cinnamon, to give you an example. If you want to make a more floral bitters, you might be using certain things like lavender and chamomile. If you want to make something a little bit fruity, you can use some fresh fruit, some fresh citrus peel. You can even use dehydrated fruit. You're all going to have different results and different flavors. But the one thing that makes a bitter is that it does have a bittering agent. Now, to add that extra bitterness, you're gonna have to use some roots, some bark, or some exotic plants. If you don't have that bittering agent inside that liquid, it's not a bitter, it's essentially a tincture. Now, bitters help blend flavors in a cocktail. We're not exactly sure how or what the science is behind it, but it seems to mask the volatile flavors that are on the forefront, and they seem to bring forward some more subtle flavors in the cocktail that you wouldn't notice until you put the bitters in. And it's very, very interesting because by itself, the bitter has a lot of concentrated flavor, but when you dilute it in a cocktail, 3 dashes really goes a long way and really transforms your cocktail. Think about adding a little bit of salt or a little bit of pepper to a dish that you're making at home. See the difference between the blandness before and how the flavors really explode afterwards. So a little really goes a long way. Now, before bitters became cocktail bitters, they were used as medicine traditionally. Now, there's something about bitter agents that really help stomach ailments, whether it's nausea, upset stomach, or even headaches. There's something medicinal about those properties. And back in the day, what they would do is they would make little elixirs, little tonics, and they would sell these as miracle cures for these ailments, and surprisingly, they worked. Now, I'm not endorsing bitters at all as a medicine, but this is what history dictates. Over time, bitters became used in cocktails and being a part of cocktail recipe. We're not sure exactly when or how this happened, but word on the street is when people were trying to get these bitters in their bodies to remedy themselves, they weren't very palatable. They're very, very bitter by themselves. So they started mixing it with alcohol so it'd be a little bit easier to down. Let's talk about tonic water for a second. You got that little bitter flavor in there. Probably wondering what that is. Well, that's a little alkaloid called quinine. Now, quinine comes from the cinchona bark, which is also a bark that is used in a lot of bitters, including our orange bitters. Now, quinine was originally used as a treatment for malaria. So they made that into a tonic, and then essentially it became a drink, and then eventually became a mixer. It's pretty mind-blowing how a lot of these old medicines have now become cocktail drinks. Now, cocktail bitters, as the name says, obviously used in cocktails for flavoring and getting some extra backbone into that cocktail and getting some extra flavors in there. But you can also apply the bitters in cooking. So for example, let's say you're making some cookie dough and it calls for a little bit of vanilla extract. You can easily omit the vanilla extract for maybe some chocolate bitters, maybe some coffee bitters, or you can even just season your cookie dough once you're done just to add a little extra flavor. Another application that you could use for cooking is in meat marinades. So if you're marinating some meats in a nice sauce, add some nice cardamom bitters, some allspice bitters. You can get very, very creative. There's some lemongrass bitters out there, orange bitters. There's so many flavors, and you can add a little certain je ne sais quoi to your recipes and get your guest guessing about what's in this meat. And another fun way is if you're making homemade whipped cream. Add a couple dashes of bitters in there and you're gonna flavor your whipped cream. You want a little bit of cherry whipped cream on that cherry pie, just put a couple dashes of cherry bitters, whip it up, and then serve it up. Now that we know a little bit more about bitters, I hope that you feel a little bit more comfortable using them. Like I said, they are the salt and pepper of the cocktail world. There's nothing to be afraid of. You should really stock up some bitters. Any decent home bar should have a good selection of bitters. Orange being the most popular bitters, next to aromatic bitters, but get creative, get new flavors. If you're making an orange cocktail, don't get an orange bitters. Try to get something different. Maybe try some cherry, maybe try some rose, because you really want to add some depth and complexity when you're making a cocktail. You don't want orange on orange on orange. You might as well be drinking orange juice. So get creative, don't be afraid, use these seasonings, and really, really have a good time building cocktails. Now, if you look on this page, you're also gonna find a couple links to some cocktails that we are making with orange bitters. Give those a look. They'll give you a nice template for base cocktails. We've got an easy cocktail, an intermediate cocktail, and a little bit more of an advanced cocktail, but even the advanced isn't that difficult. So have a little bit of confidence, use your bitters with pride, and mix up a hell of a cocktail.